I would like to say a few words from a different perspective after what Irena said about Miłosz and his connection to borderland and to our first part of the day discussion, how he can be seen in this context of ethos of pogranicze, of the borderland. But before that, I would like to add one thing, that the phenomena of Miłosz is also this, that he wrote several iconic poems which are part of world literature, even if people don't know who Czesław Miłosz really was. You know, that there are some poems, for example, I was just discussing with Irena, imagine these situations that in the United States there is a funeral of a cult figure for human rights movement who was a disciple of Martin Luther King, and his disciple, his friend, is saying eulogy, you know, on the funeral, and all cameras of all TV stations and so on are just registering and doing it in all TV channels and so on. And suddenly he opens this eulogy with the words that he wants to read because he can't express his emotions and feelings. And now he will read a poem by, and he even couldn't pronounce his name, you know, Czesław Miłosz, something like that. He was not a poetry person, literary person. He was just for human rights movement. And he wrote the sense, you know, the poem meaning by Miłosz, like, you know, you read Shakespeare or Dante, you know, that you take it, you know, from the global library, you know, of world literature. And, or there are, for example, you know, an anthology of the 100 best poems of 20th century, and you suddenly find the song of the end of the world, yes? With this, or you have an anthology of the Buddhist poetry of 20th century, yes, and you have another poem by Miłosz. These all different contexts, because I'm saying also this because for writers from this part of the world it's very immensely difficult to enter this not level, you know, where your background matters and you have this drawer or shelf in the libraries that it is Central Europe or this is, and then you have it. But you have something you know, totally universal, and suddenly you take poet from or poems, because not even poet, because they don't fully are aware about this. And Miłosz was this rare case of breaking this line, yes, and becoming, you know, some with some poems, like for example Campo di Fiori. You know, we have the friend who was the director of Polish Institute in Rome, in Italy, and they managed to put the board on the Campo di Fiori in Rome with this poem, yes, which usually the local authorities reject every influence in the space, you know, with any boards, you know, and so on. And suddenly when you are in the Campo di Fiori, you have a Miłosz poem. Campo di Fiori, yeah, this poem.
We will talk about it
tomorrow, yes, because. And he compared it with the fate of people from Warsaw Jewish ghetto uprising, you know, and Irena will tell about it more tomorrow in relation to the war. And so that's also his phenomena, you know, when we talk about the language he was using, the way he was using, it's breaking all the borders. And this poem, meaning, sounds like that. I will read you. When I die, I will see the lining of the world, the other side, beyond bird, mountain, sunset. the true meaning, ready to be decoded. What never added up will add up. What was incomprehensible will be comprehended. And if there is no lining to the word, if a trash on a branch is not a sign, but just a trash on the branch, if night and day make no sense following each other, and on this earth there is nothing except this earth, even if that is so, there will remain a word wakened by lips that perish, a tireless messenger who runs and runs through interstellar fields, through the revolving galaxies, and calls out, protests, screams. This is the meaning, this poem. And another one from, this Buddhist anthology of world poetry, This Only. A valley and above it forest in autumn colors. A voyager arrives, a map led him here, or perhaps memory. Once, long ago, in the sun, when the first snow fell, riding this way, he felt joy, strong, without reason. Joy of the eyes. Everything was the rhyme of shifting trees, of a bird in flight, on a train on the viaduct, a feast of motion. He returns years later, has no demands. He wants only one most precious thing, to see, purely and simply, without name, without expectations, fears, or hopes, at the edge where there is no I or not I. Okay, so this is another small thing to tell about Miłosz, but I'm coming back to the borderland ethos. I have here the book published by Łukasz. They have this beautiful series, Europe of the Center, Europa Środka. And the book is by Tomasz Węclowa about Lithuania, my homeland. But the quotation is from Polish poet Mickiewicz. So it's hard to say Polish in the way. So that the most, it's like a national epos we have in Polish, like Rustaveli, epos by Mickiewicz opens up with this word Lithuania, Lithuania, my homeland. But I'm saying this because Thomas belongs also to this family of the borderlanders, and having this experience of being in diaspora, living as a dissident and emigre in United States, and then he returned and still lives in Vilnius now, in Lithuania. And the first thing I want to say is, because we were mentioning already it, and if you remember our first meeting in Athens, in Georgia, one of the reasons we initiated the dilemma.academy was absent today Katie Cantaria saying once when I was visiting Georgia and Tbilisi that she wants to organize Jerzy Giedroyć Festival in Georgia. And I was so struck, what? Jerzy Giedroyć? Who knows Jerzy Giedroyć in Georgia? Yes, in the Caucasus, yes? Katie Cantaria, yes. But for her, when Giedroyć was, as she explained, the most actual thinker for maybe Caucasus for now to be known and to be explored. So what I want to tell you now is about Miłosz, Węclowa, and also borderland, belonging to a tradition of Jerzy Giedroyć school, or Jerzy Giedroyć, the magazine which was called Kultura, and which was published in Paris or near Paris, as something what changed many things in our view to the borderland and in our view about ourselves and how we deal with these borderland situations here. And maybe also there's a still ongoing discussion, by my belief and concern is that we could have on that borderland the war like in former Yugoslavia or like you had in Caucasus, if not the work of Jerzy Giedroyć and his team. And again, you can say what this small group of people, you know, just bunch of intellectuals, writers, philosophers living somewhere in Paris, you know, in émigré, what they have in common with a transformation after 1989 and the way we prevented, you know, the fire on the borderland, you know, after the transformation and so on and so on. And very often we believe, you know, being like a pragmatic of politics, that of course Bush and Gorbachev did it for us. Yes, that's very often the perspective we have, that big powers, you know, manage to do it for us. Yes, exactly. So, not dismissing that, I also believe in this organic groundwork which was done. And Miłosz took part in that, was, you know, the part of this team and this formation which changed our psyche, our mind, our pattern of culture and history and so on. So it was like paradigm-changing work, which you believe that always would be like that. Yes, that we are always stuck in our views, prejudices, you know, and so on. That's what Timothy Snyder calls eternity in his book On the Road to Unfreedom. You know that it is this position in Russia, for example, they have that things are eternal. It means that history always repeats itself and there is no chance to change it. And because it is like so the empire foundation, it's always regaining new life because people don't believe that there is a way out of that. Yes, that we are stuck and imprisoned and enslaved by these patterns and nothing change, and there is no possibility to change it. So you have, so why Miłosz was part of that? Because his background, as Irena was mentioning, you know, being born in today's Lithuania and growing in a family, you know, when he saw all the tragedies around with borderlands, with war and so on, but at the same time growing on with in the family, in the environment which was not nationalistic, yes, which was open to the neighbors, you know, the new languages. His grandfather in Šėtėnė in Lithuania was so-called Litvoman, so the Litvophilia, you know, loving Lithuanian neighbors and others, and so on. So. And he was, you know, from that formation, which we call them sometimes the citizens of Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Grand Duchy of Lithuania was a federation, you know, before these lands were occupied by three empires, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. So for a few centuries, you had a multicultural federation here. of Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the union with Polish Respublika, and except the fact that there were many inequalities, that there were many conflicts, and the nationalism started to grow here in 19th century very strongly. The understanding of culture was something like sharing in common. Yes, that they were from that formation, that for them culture was something what connects rather than divides. That culture was something like a level of being together and sharing together or inheriting something what is broader than any ethnic, religious, and other identities. Yes, so there was, and of course it was in connection with European culture, you know, with roots in Athens, in ancient Greece, in democracy, and so on. So when I once visited Czesław Miłosz in Krakow, you know, it was a moment that they proposed me to become a minister of culture, and I was, you know, so emotional about this, what I should do, and so on, that I called Czesław Miłosz and asked him, can we meet, because I have something important to talk with you. And so I came very late night and spent several hours in the kitchen with him discussing. But the first question I raised, because he asked me, okay, what is such important thing you are coming with? And I said, what you would do if you become Minister of Culture? And his first answer was, I will introduce Greek language to the schools. All the Greek, yes. But I said, but this is not a Minister of Education, but Minister of Culture. Is it separated? He couldn't even understand that, you know, that this is not a culture, yeah? So that's, in short, how he saw the term culture. Yes, and of course Irena was saying about he being translated from ancient Greek language, but he knew it from gymnasium, yes, from that pre-war, you know, educational systems, that it was a part of curricula. And when I was studying, you know, the myth of Medea and Euripides, I discovered the edition from Lviv, you know, publishing in 1913 or 12, you know, the book of Medea, and the introduction is, and the book is for the primary schools, you know, like, and the introduction is in Polish, but then the original Euripides goes on, you know, of Medea, which was part of a school education. I'm saying that the how he perceived culture was, you know, just embracing, you know, what could be the universe, yes, like sharing something together and having language and worldview, which is more about connecting and embracing than dividing. And for example, he wrote, after Captive Mind, he wrote another very important book, which is called The Native Realm. Rodzinna Europa in English is translated The Native Realm, which when I work on that book with my students in Bologna University, you know, they are students of political science and with European studies, and the book was written late 1950s. They couldn't believe that it was written, you know, at that time in Europe, you know, that kind of view on Europe after the war, that if we could survive all this terrible heart of darkness, we should build Europe as rodzinna Europa in Polish, he would say. So rodzinna is how Italian is Europa familiare. Also, it was translated into into Italian language like Mia Europa, or in French like La Autre Europe, like the other Europe. Yes, in Spanish, Otra Europa. In German, even worse. You know, the lands of Eastern Europe or something like that. So already in language, we were analyzing all the translations, you know, in different European language. It was immensely difficult to find the word which can name or be, you know, like rodzinna Europa. Yes, like feeling rodzinna means that it's again, it's ours. Yes, again. Yes. Ah. Hmm. I think yeah. No. No. Uh-huh. Now, it would be interesting to check out also this, but and it is very interesting. It is kind of intellectual autobiography. So he wrote it with an intention to explain the Western readers what his background is, what is this Grand Duchy of Lithuania, what is these borderlands are. But in fact, this book became a formative book also for us in Poland, in Lithuania, in Central Eastern Europe. Thomas Węslowa told me the story. Imagine that they received, you know, from the emigre friends from Paris, letters in which in each letter was just one page of Rodzinna Europa, of the native realm. So only way to put, you know, this page into the letter, and they were collecting it. So somebody receive it and then give to others. So people were reading page by page, you know, knowing sometimes by heart, you know, what he was writing about, and building the self-consciousness, you know, of what we are, you know, in fact, and what our Europe in fact is. That was also the role of Miłosz, you know, to construct this narrative for all of us, which was placing us not like provincial people, you know, claiming to the West that we are also important, but on a really equal and very critical, self-critical way, our presence in European heritage and so on, because this book is very painful for us, you know, Poles and others, you know, about all our other weaknesses, anti-Semitism, you know, nationalism, and so on and so on. So that's a formative power of the writing of Miłosz, also in that terms, that he took this challenge to write the story for all these destroyed, cut with new borders land, that offering us this new perspective that there was something what connects us, and there is a deep background we can refer after 1989 and find ourselves, you know, this as a tradition. So. And it was published by Giedroyć, of course, among other books of Miłosz. But what was also new in that school of people, that for them, the pre-war time, so pre-1939 time, was not an idealized paradise, because what happened with our anti-communist opposition, you know, and after 1945 was that we started to idealize this period of national sovereignty and having this short term of national state in the 20s and 30s. But in fact, as Irena also quoted these verses from the Nation poem and so on, it was, we were slowly, as Poland, shifting to kind of fascist regime, and the more and more nationalistic and fascist ideologies prevail in our politics. And that was a memory of Miłosz of that time. And he even, in the 90s, he gave us a very important book, almost kind of a documentary, the expedition into the 1920s, when he collected different articles, journalism, from that period, showing how fascism, nationalism, xenophobia were strong, and how it was combined with Catholicism, with church, this union between nationalism and church and everything. Very painful lesson for us. So for him, having this experience in 20s and 30s, that was, the school, what we should do after the Second World War. And that the same formation was with Giedroyć, with Witold Gombrowicz, with Leszek Kołakowski, and with some important authors Giedroyć gathered as a team for the Kultura magazine. So they started to publish monthly, very persistently, each month, and they built upon the subscription, in all the diaspora, but also they slowly managed to przeszmuglować, smuggle these books into Poland. Yes, and it was in Polish, but also what they did, for example, that they did a famous anthology of Ukrainian poetry, which was called Rozstrzelanie Відродження, yes, Rozstrzelanie Відродження in Ukrainian, and it was, this anti-Soviet Ukrainian poetry, which was, very important, formative for Ukrainian intellectuals and writers and so on, and some other initiatives like that. But what was the main point, in this building new narrative and changing our paradigm was that, the former Polish Republic with Grand Duchy of Lithuania was covering the lands of today's Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, partly also Latvia. And as Irena told, the dominant cultural language was Polish, and what happened over the centuries was assimilation of elites of Lithuanians, Ukrainians, Belarusians to the Polish language and Polish cultures. And we saw, Poles, we saw it as our territories, but in this patronizing way, yes, that it was a kind of colonizing all these lands and covering with them with Polish language and culture. And then after First World War, of course, there were first, this partition of three empires, but then after the First World War, new national states appeared, that we started to have this kind of nostalgia, and we even managed to regain Vilnius, for example, as Polish town in the 20s of 20th century. So it was, like an island, the Kaunas became a capital of Lithuania, temporary, but still Vilnius was part of Poland at the time, and also was this nostalgia toward Lviv, and so on and so on. So, and it was very, very strong in our mindset, of Polish, that these are our lands, and so on. So when Second World happened and we had this diaspora of Polish emigrants, anti-communist people, there was two emigrations, let's say symbolic. One was in London, which was, that kind of conservative and with nostalgia toward our former lands, and with beliefs that we will still regain it somehow. And there was the Paris Maison Lafitte, where Cultura was published, as having totally different attitude to that. And the decision of Giedroyć and his friends and his team was that we should understand that we should resign from that lens, that we should accept that in the future, when Soviet Union will collapse, there will be independent states of Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. And more, we should do every effort to help in that process. So we should engage ourselves, our intelligentsia, our publishing, our every possible way to help them to gain sovereignty and be in the future partners of us. And you can imagine that at the beginning, they became immediately kind of traitors to Poles, especially to these London circles, but people who betrayed Poland, yes, and who did this wrong thing. So it was long process of engaging all these intellectual culture powers, writings, publishing books, and so on, to change this mindset that it should happen and that we should contribute even to it. Yes, and that's why in Nobel Prize speech, Miłosz was talking about not only countering Ribbentrop-Molotov Treaty, as something which is against international law, but he was saying that Vilnius should be a capital of independent Lithuania. Yeah, in the speech. Yeah, and that was just part of this work and the positions they took, very firmly and working all the time on that. And Miłosz, with all his books, of course, contributed to that immensely. Of course, for Miłosz, Giedroyć was too political. He was always attacking Giedroyć that the magazine is called Culture, Kultura, but there is a little culture in that. But in fact, there was a lot of poetry publishing, literature published there, but it was not only that. It was also this political thinking and engagement in other dimension of social, political ways. And another thing was that this circle of Paris Cultura were doing everything to respect the difficult situation of people who stayed in the country. So in contrary to London diaspora, which saw from above this communist, country and people and so on, that it is nothing good there, that we should just reject it in whole. The Giedroyć circles do every effort to have a dialogue, to publish also people from the country, to publish their books, sometimes under, nicknames, changing names, sometimes directly, but they were very open to engage people from the country. And when this underground movement started in Poland after '68, in the '70s, when there were, slowly growing this initiative like CORE, Committee for Defense of Workers, or then growing solidarity movements, Paryska Kultura was a big help, on each possible level to support it. Yes, and I was at that time, I was, engaged in Poznań, in our underground. We publish a magazine, Time of Culture. And I remember when I traveled to the West for the first time there to Munich, there were Radio Free Europe there. I was arranging Xerox, to transport it to Poland, which was bought by Paryska Kultura, by Giedroyć, and there were channels, to have it for Solidarność Wielkopolska, which were our publisher in Poznań. So there were many other ways to offer this support. And in the end, when 1989 appeared, this autumn of nations, as we call it, so country by country we gain independence. There was, of course, and you can imagine, knowing all the conflicts between Poles and Ukrainians, between Poles and Lithuanians, and so on, that a new fire on the borderland would happen. And there were efforts, of course, of Moscow at that time to do everything to push Poles against Lithuanians and to have Polish minority, for example, against independence, or showing that Polish that the nationalism will be against, and they will want to regain Vilnius, and you should treat Poles as enemies, and so on and so on. So many possibilities. The same with Ukraine and so on. Possibilities to put this fire on. Yes, to light this spark. But we were not ready for that. There was no political support for such extremism and nostalgia to regain anything. Maybe after 20 years, and today you will find much more politicians and parties and taking again this issue. But at that time, it was something that we will prepare to defend this open view toward our neighbors against any other powers, and that's why this influence of Russia of burning hate here and fight didn't have chance to appear as a strong political.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I would like to add that Poles, because thanks to resigning from Vilnius and Lviv and so on, got half of Germany on the other side. So the revising of borders was absolutely not in the interest of Poles, because if there would be reclaiming of Lviv and Vilnius for Poland, then Poland would have to give up probably Wrocław, at least, Szczecin, yes, and all of this part. So a great influence of cultura, but also some common sense.
Yes. But you are very rationalistic, yes. But we have still politicians,
I would say that it was not so easy, because Poles, they were saying that we didn't wanted this ugly, hated cities like Breslau, the cities of the enemy. Yeah, so this was not an equal exchange, because we lost the wonderful cities where the Polishness was flourishing, receiving horrible cities of the enemy. So it was not accepted, this kind of deal. However, I hope it saved us at least from the traumas that Hungarians experienced after the First World War, when they were cut off, having nothing in exchange, and this trauma is lasting until nowadays, this feeling that they live in a too small country.
But I don't want to, you are saying that the Poles were, feeling that these are ugly cities and so on. But I think that, first of all, these cities were very rich and phenomenally, phenomenal advance. Secondly, the other thing that I heard, there was a saying right after the war. They're saying one more war, we are in Paris. Because this movement towards West was something that was, there was, in a way, two kinds of population. The population that was brought from the Eastern territories, and that was placed in these really newly emptied German cities. So that population may have felt that these are not such a pretty, but this kind of a central Poland's population, I think, was not looking with, was really happy of moving away from the east more towards the west. Happy, I don't know. I mean, it was not a happy situation altogether, because it was the massive cleansing and so on, and moving of population. But I don't know. Anyhow, this is, I don't know, it must be very boring for everybody to hear our, it's the tail issues about Polish inside quarrels, who like,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree that cultura played an incredible role. And there's a letter, amazing letter of Czesław Miłosz to Giedroyć from early 50s, in which he said the only way in which Europe can avoid war is having a federation, a European federation. Really visionary. So he was not interested in this politics of the type that Giedroyć was, but he had a political instinct.
However, I understand the Krzysztof message as the message that you can deal with the ghost from the past only on your own. Because there are nations, I observe it in Central Europe nowadays, that there are nations who did so, even if it is horrible process, like psychologically process of totally destroying yourself and then building up again as a human being. So it applies also to the imagined community as nation is. So I observe our friends in Europe who are saying that we suffered so much and nobody's coming with the solution. They are even expecting justifying from the outside. And when we are saying it was, I of course confess the experience of Uzhgorod with the Hungarians, because they were wondering, really, you did so? You said that you are okay without Lviv or Grodno or Vilnius? Because I was trying to say, you have to say that you are okay leaving Koložvar to Romania, leaving Košo to Slovakia, and Novi Sad to Serbia. And but they were really surprised that Hungarians, that you can have this kind of challenge that you destroy on your own, and you question everything what is the most important, you do it on your own, even being a kind of betrayer, but it is the only way to build something healthy. And the same we observe in Serbia, Krzysztof, that they are waiting for someone who will come to tell. what to
Yes.
do, avoiding this most difficult question for ourselves, for themselves.
Because Irena, how the mindset works. Not like that, something can come back to Germany, and the mindset doesn't operate like that. That Germany was the justice of history. Yes, there was a war, they were defeated with fascism, so there is a price at least. Of course, there was another thing that, this communist ideology did, that it was always Polish lands from the past, yeah. So that's how the mindset works, and still it's not erasing this nostalgia, for to the east. Yes, so you can't do this rationality that not claiming for Lviv we should resign from Szczecin or Wrocław. That was not this logic, present. Yes, because we understood that it is a justice of history that we have Wrocław. Yes, but the another thing was about this eastern lands. So still it was in the paradigma, of our pattern, which you should change, and to learn that what Łukasz is saying, that to resign means sometimes to build a good future. Yes, and we always were coming with our Serbian friends with the Center of the Contamination of Culture. I remember in Belgrade we always had this discussion why there is no possibility in Serbian leaders to have this attitude to, in a wise way, you resign from Kosovo, yes, as understanding, because the power of Milosevic grew on that resentment, yes, that if we will introduce democracy into the country, we will lose Kosovo, yes, because people started to vote and they will gain autonomy and then sovereignty, yes? So there is no way for the democracy in that way, so you launch authoritarian government to defend Serbian interest and to keep, the land with 80% of Albanians as our, yes, against the will and everything. So not to resign meant for all the decades justification of the war and nationalism and everything what regime of Milosevic did. Yes, and still it is a huge problem for today's Serbia. Yes, that it keeps the radical nationalists in power, because still the case of Kosovo is this something what you play in that game, and how you gain power, about fears that we should lose it and so on. So that's very unique, I think, and I don't think that that all these cases of our borderlands are the same. That we will discuss here the case of Abkhazia, Georgia, and other Caucasian situation, and I don't think that they should be the same. You will describe it as you feel. It will be very interesting for us, yes, also to see how you see these things from your perspective. I just want to give you this background, this description how it is here, how it was here, yes, and I remember very well when I traveled, in the 90s, even during the war in Yugoslavia, to Sarajevo, to Belgrade, to Mostar, to talk about Paryska Kultura, about Giedroyć, and how difficult for them was to understand that there was a diaspora circle somewhere in the West, not putting fuel to the fire of nationalism, which usually happened in the case of Serbian diaspora, Croatian diaspora, Bosnian. There was diaspora meant that they fuel your nationalism, from abroad. That was the case in all cases, in majority. So suddenly we had this very unique, situation that from diaspora came this completely different stream of a message and of the work with our society. Yes, Ola, you wanted to say something?
May I add
yes.
one more thing, because I have the feeling that this situation you described, Krzysztof, is now the crucial question for Russia. So, because everybody's wondering whether Russia could be reformed somehow, or how to do this, or we are trying to help Russia to reform. Yes, because it has to be internal, and the sad message is probably that Russia is not, and Russians are not able to do so, to attack the very fundamental issues of Russianness, the way we were able, the way Ukrainians were able, because letting Ukraine go is part of that, as I said, terrible process. So my feeling is that Russia is unable, but I feel some kind of hope in changing Russia's mind, in letting Russia be inferior with China. So letting Russia go to Asia, because one of Russia's dream is that they are Europeans, and they are even better Europeans, yeah? Not anymore. Yeah. So, but the most uncomfortable situation for Russia is to be inferior to some state or some power, and the only power nowadays is China, which can let Russia to feel so that you are weak and you are dependent. So probably we have to even push Russia a little bit to Asia back. But I'm angry because the Western people are trying to do the Russian job instead of the Russians, saying, but okay, there are some good Russians, or okay, let's support them. No, they have to do this on their own, and what we can help to leaving them alone to make it. This is my feeling.
Can I tell? It's painful.
Oh, whoa, what a painful question. I think that, I have a kind of a comparison, it's like with an alcoholic, you know, and there is someone like a family member bringing this alcoholic to the doctor and then say, I want you to cure this person. But the thing is that this alcoholic doesn't want to be cured. It's just like a normal life, so you cannot do this job actually for this alcoholic. And with Russia, I think, because I have had, when you were talking about Lviv, when I was in Lviv in February this year, it was a very pop and very weird feeling. So that Lviv is now selling their new brand. Before it was just like this Galician chota. So there is this, again, this golden myth about these golden ages of being a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire and being a part of Galicia and having all this. This is actually what Galicians are doing now to others. They're saying that they are, I'm generalizing and also making it a little bit cliches, but it's so common so that someone will come, oh, you know what, my grandma, she had all these nice Tischtücher und dann blah, blah, blah. And so they would say that we have been civilized, for many, many, many years when you were illiterate and so on, because you were the part of the Russian Empire and we were the part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and so on and so on. And this is which empire was better? And this kind of discourse is is now quite common. So I would say that Lviv is now kind of selling this brand of the golden myth of how cool it was being a part of Galicia that was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then I would...
Krakow is doing the same without any reason, but...
And then it's also very interesting because this kind of myth about these three brotherly nations, like Belarus, Ukrainians, and Russians were all the same, and blah blah blah. But then now it's very interesting, like, to discover how Ukrainians who've been spread all around Europe, how they discover each other, especially with other Slavs. Someone going to Slovakia and like suddenly realizing that you understand them speaking to you, or then going to Croatia and then speaking like this, and then going to somewhere else, and then, I mean, people really discover each other. And suddenly they realize that there are not just three brotherly nations, there are much more brotherly nations, and we have this common history that we don't really, I mean, we didn't deal with it for such a long time, and maybe it's also time to... Yeah, really, it's like surprise and it's discovery, because on the one hand, well, I have never had like so many contacts with people from former Yugoslavia like now, when like living in Austria and also dealing with people who've been escaping the war at that time. So I deal either with moms who escaped with their kids, or like with kids who were like kids at that time, but they are now the time of my age. And this is very interesting because when I was now in Croatia just a couple of days ago, it was that people who do not speak English, they start to like showing you things and saying something, but then suddenly they realize that you understand them and they start speaking Croatian, and like with first or second synonym, you will understand them. And this is, well, and I remember I had an incident and I was in the hospital and they were asking me which language, I mean, do I speak? And then there was a doctor saying that she speaks German and English and she understands Croatian, so it's not a problem. And this was really a discovery by so many people who are like ordinary citizens, whatever, like just normal people doing their normal jobs without being so hyper-culturalized or whatever. Sorry.
Why are you discovering this right now? For example, like in Soviet era, you could still travel to the Slovakia because it was also the social camp or so-called, and I'm not sure about Croatia, like border was closed.
Yugoslavia was different than Soviet Union, but this experience is the same with Croatian people. I'm born in 1990, and now I discovered that all the region, even Poland is very close to me. I'm like very surprised. When I went to Ukraine, when I went to Uzhgorod, I was really very surprised by the fact that I feel home much more in Poland, in Ukraine, in Slovakia. No, it's really, I have no idea, but I think it has my opinion is, or theory, is that we are what we used to, so we were discussing Central Europe, but I think that we are also much connected with the togetherness of history, and that we are all in the mass. For example, before all these periods, I think that nations were much more together. Like if I go back in my family, now I know that my father was, Croatian, my mother is Bosnian, but I have no idea which are, maybe they are Hungarians, maybe they came from Ukraine, maybe they came, so we are very mixed in all these areas, and I think that we often forget that. And we also share this common history of a constant conflict since, I think last century. So we have world wars, we have Holocaust, we have all these things. Then we have Soviet aggression. Okay, Yugoslavia went with Stalin, like Tito saying, no, we cannot. But Tito was, Yugoslavia was a different thing. But it also was a very strong regime. It wasn't as bad maybe as in some other countries. And it did a lot of progress. But still we are dealing with the fact that communism did a lot of bad too. We can say, okay, they built this, they did this, the situation was far more better. But people also went to prisons for not, obeying the authorities and so on. So I think that this everything, when you point it together and you now start to, connect the dots, you realize, but this is homeland, very broad homeland in which we all have the same roots. That is the one thing. And the second thing is that we all have this very strange even history, because in some part of the histories we were maybe the ones that were killing someone, and then in the other part of the history we were killed. So in Croatian history there is this entire, it's very hard to follow even, I have this personal story, it's very, amazing stories, because we are from the small village near Petrinja, and now my mother tells me, because everyone died before I got to ask them, and so she's like, okay, yes, but brother of my grandmother was killed during the Second War. And I'm like, okay, but was he partisan or was he, Ustasha? And she's like, who cares? He died. And I'm like, okay, so I have no idea. So I suppose actually that he was on the wrong side. Okay, because they're small villages, it's Banija, so we can assume that people went through there and just collecting, as I said, people. But there's another story when she mentions, also by the memory, hearing that from my grandmother, that their parents were in the camp. So I'm like connecting the dots with the timeline, but there were camps only for, people that were wronged in this way, and they had put them there. So I was like, okay, but that means that he had to be a part, or maybe they were both, I don't know, So it's very hard to find, but what we are dealing with now, I think that we are starting to see that, and even now the situation in Ukraine shows us that we already had this, not the same experience, but because Russia is far more greater aggressor than Serbia was towards Croatia, and the situation is different. But there is also this timeline of history. So this is ongoing, actually, thing. Because I remember in my village there was a huge massacre, and so we kind of all knew, and my grandparents told me that once, that this was like giving back from the World War II. And something happened before World War II, because they were giving also, it was like it's not a war in these regions, it was like Osveta, vengeance, it's very interesting. So I think that we are so, it is a bloodland, every part of these regions, but in a way, I think that this, position of even a victim, but then taking your own responsibility, then start not to be a victim, but then make a mistake and do, this position of being a butcher. We did it also, as I said, in Yugoslavian war, because we're not clean after that war, which is a bad thing, because we could have been. So yes, I think that is the part of rediscovering what we can say Central Europe is. I think that now this question is back on the table, because you have new generations and you have all these movements in the Europe. Finally, we realize, yes, in this whole area that we are somehow, we had no idea that we are connected. Yeah, so that is very strange and very beautiful at the same time.
Hanna and Victoras. Yeah, okay.
So if we expect something of Russians now, I think it's not time. If we use the examples of Poland or Germany, we should remember that they changed only after a big failure, really very big failure, and not even immediately after it. As far as I remember, this essay by Marashevsky was published in 1974, so 20 years after the end of Second World War, and Poland becoming a part of like Eastern Bloc, or I don't know how to call it. And the same with Germany. It took more than 20 years. So if we wait something of this kind of Russia, it's not the time. First one thing is to help Ukraine to win. So that's why we shouldn't expect anything of Russia, but just struggle with Russia. And then
And Victoras?
I would like to respectfully but disagree with Monica. and all the others who say that we have a common history. And it's a continuation of our conversation from Uzhgorod about Central Europe. I think it is a fiction, Central Europe. It is something that is very convenient when you... She disagrees, of course. I'm so used to that. But I think that the only reason why Central Europe works and why it has now a rebirth, because it is our reaction to the threat of Russia. If you take away that, the outside threat, there is nothing in common between Baltics, Balkans, Caucasus, and former Austro-Hungary. Just nothing. Yeah. Well, of course, we're all humans, blah, blah, blah. So you will always find something, but... Yeah, but that's also, you could say that's socialist camp, whatever. So, of course, when you look very carefully, you will always find something. But for the most part, normally, it's just a sign that we haven't studied our histories. Yes. When we say that this is a region of conflicts, if you ask in Western Europe, they will say there was never 10 years in the last 600 years that there would be no war between Germany, France, and England. That's last 8 years, that's why it's a miracle that there is no war in Western Europe, because it was always a war. They invented the concept of 100 years of war. And we say, no, our region is so unique. We keep fighting. No, there's nothing unique about that. I was asked now when I was in the States, these kids got together, they said, oh, the Baltics, the small region, the Baltics. So Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. You are from the Baltics. Please tutor these students who are interested in the region. First thing I told them, there is nothing in common in the region, except that these three little small countries are next to each other. We have nothing in common. Religion, language, statehood, nothing. It's just that we just lump them together and we say, oh, they're just somewhere there. So yes. My concept, what I'm trying to propose is, of course, when we need to counter a threat from outside, then of course we develop a vertebra. We develop something because we have to stand firm. And there is no question about it, that now we have a threat. Ukrainians are fighting and there is no question about it. But also we have to be careful to remember that this is a fiction, helpful fiction, but a fiction. That's my thesis.
Okay, we will come back to this. No. We will talk later.
Sorry, Monica.
Victoras, but using. Okay, let me speak something. If you would say yes this way, it's why these stupid Scandinavians keep together? Yes, so many differences, but they are Scandinavians and they are Mediterranean culture. Yes, that's what you said, Victoras, is very typical for me as I see Central European intellectuals. Yes, you are absolutely Central European, in this negative. But just at the end, I would just underline one more thing about Miłosz and Kultura and having this attitude of changing pattern. Yes. Because sometimes what prevails us to do such courageous intervention to these, paradigmas and so on is the obsessions with our suffering. Yes, that especially after the war, you feel that you are a victim. The discussions, for example, when concerning Russia, which I have with my friends from Memorial, you know, this organization of, is that what they find very typical for Russia is that people are so obsessed with their own pain, you know, under Tsarist, under communist regime and so on. They could be anti, they could be dissident, but they hardly can be pro-Ukrainians, pro-Belarusians. That's a thing. That's unique thing what Giedroyć and Miłosz did, you know, because they could have any reasons to find among, you know, suffering people and focusing on our own pain, as London emigration did, yes? But this gesture that, you know, after the terrible war, they think, you know, how to help Ukrainians, how to establish relationships with others was really unique, yes? That's what I want to underline. My discussion with Amos Oz, you know, he was feeling at the end of his life that the life is lost. All because there was not enough, you know, the obsession of the Jewish memory in Israel prevailed any possibility to step in shoes of their neighbors. Yes, that there was, you know, so strong, so heavy, that there was no room to do gesture for the others, you know, to be treated as traitors, yes, because we are not defending enough our own suffering, our own rights, and so on. So when we are talking about borderland ethos of the borderland, it is one of the very crucial things that even in the very dark circumstances, you are capable, you know, somehow it's, you know, to think about the others and to build your way of practice, of action, you know, in partnership rather than closing to your own interest and so on. So it's part of something what we will discuss more next days. It's only first day. We only started, you know.